The keen audiophiles among you, I'm sure, are always on the lookout for hi-fi product gems. And by gems, I probably mean the same thing as unicorns or Pegasus or giant killers that's used on some other YouTube channels. But I'm English, so for me, they're just gems. And I think that's really important in the modern hi-fi market because let's face it, most hi-fi products these days sound good, and a lot of them sound very good. So that means the gems are likely to be very special. And I know there will be a lot of hi-fi product gems being manufactured by companies that I have never heard of before. But it's interesting that once you get to know these companies for the right reasons, you never forget them. And I'm sure you will agree with me there. And for me, it's not really about the manufacturer of a product that interests me. I take a look at it and try and make a decision whether I think it might sound amazing or not. And if I think it might do, then it interests and excites me. And that is exactly how I felt when I looked at the Audiozen Embrace, because it's an interesting recipe of new old stock tube preamplification with solid state amplification with a quirky design. And it's been really interesting because it's been nothing like how I expected it to be. It's a wonderful mixture of clever simplicity with an addictive sound presentation that's damn right exceptional for the money. And that's the real kicker here. I think it will be not attainable to everybody, but it will be attainable to a lot of audiophiles. And I think it's an awesome amplifier. I love it with the Mission 770s. Audiozen are an Italian hi-fi manufacturer that maybe you are aware of, but I had never heard of them before until this review, and yet they've been making products since 2008, and the Embrace is part of their Zen line. And I think it's classified as a hybrid integrated amplifier, and yet I think it's more clever than that. It's a two chassis design, semi-separating the NOS New Old Stock tube preamplifier from the solid state amplification that's built into the one chassis, and then separating them from the power supplies, of which there are three that are built into the second chassis, and they connect together with a custom umbilical cable. So that creates an almost dual mono NOS tube preamplifier with almost separate stereo power amplifier, while still remaining compact and modest in price. And that to me is the clever bit. But just to confirm, this is just a hi-fi amplifier. So no DAC, no streamer, no phono stage, and no bells and whistles. Just a hi-fi amplifier. And I know there is a current trend for audiophiles to want everything in the one amplifier box. But you know what? I still think for the best performance, separates is the way to go. But I'm happy to be proven wrong on that point. And that's also enough product information for me at this stage, because I know you audiophiles, you are a judgmental, fickle bunch. So I just want to start the review by telling you why I love this amplifier, and that is because of its sound quality. The Embrace does all important audio desirable things really well. Excellent timing, fantastic transparency, great soundstage, with depth going both forwards and backwards from the speakers, great tonality, and more. But here is the bit that makes it stand out for me. There must have been a serious amount of thought and attention from the amplifier's designer put into how they wanted it to sound or how they wanted it to present music. And if you're thinking new old stock tube preamplifier, that means this amplifier is going to be, warm and fuzzy and, pipe and slippers type of sound, because that's what I was expecting. Let me tell you, this is not the case. This is actually the opposite. What there is a real sense of immediacy, of strong transient attack, a quiet live sound. And I don't mean PA speaker live sound, because no one wants that. I mean dynamism in transients that can have real attack and impact and be tight and focused like you're listening to a big expensive amplifier, which is really quite funny when you look at the Embrace's internals, because your eyes don't believe your ears. And I know what you're thinking, maybe I don't want that type of sound all the time. Well, let me tell you, once you've listened to it for a bit, it becomes really very, very addictive. That real sense of transient clarity and great timing and real energy to the music that makes it more alive or lively sounding. And it's addictive because it's balanced so well with all the important audiophile attributes that I mentioned, such as transparency, great soundstage, great tonality, a nice warmth to the presentation, and real sense of ease with it as well. A fantastic combination of all of those key areas. And there is an incredible amount of control from the amplifier too, especially in the bass. Listening to Poem of Chinese Drums is a real experience with the Embrace Mission 770 speakers. The drum hits are big, impactful, but you can hear the intricacies of the tension of the drum heads. The notes decay and echo in the room before the next drum attack is even faster. And this really shows how fast the amplifier is and how it delivers its power in an instant. All with incredible control and a three-dimensional holographic sound. So all these bass attacks and notes are happening beyond the speaker's plane and quite far back in terms of a sense of sound, which is really very impressive. But this is an audiophile type of recording. What happens when you switch over to something like Hardwired by Metallica? But listening to Metallica on the Embrace was a real experience because it's intense and fast and percussive and loud and arse-kicking, as this music should be, but with control and poise and an air of real quality. And I love that when you change the music to maybe a movie soundtrack, anything from Hans Zimmer, your emotions change too. And you are now really drawn into the music rather than being hammered into submission by it. And the big crescendo peaks in the Pirates of the Caribbean soundtracks have real scale. Top to bottom, room-filling scale and impact, showing me a scale and impact I didn't know the Mission 770 were capable of. The music in Hans Zimmer soundtracks often gets very intense at times, and in the main, the Embrace does an amazing job of not only keeping up, but keeping the intensity one big scale peak after another at loud volumes. And its composure is maybe not quite perfect while doing this, but it's still damn impressive for an amplifier at this price point. And I'm not sure whether my slight criticism here is actually the amplifier or maybe other things within the system, because I'm not used to actually hearing this. Switching to some big female singers, Lynn Stanley is one I often use, and her voice sounds big and warm and rich and solid, commanding your attention and with real character. And the big double bass in the Bye Bye Blackbird track is huge and detailed and insightful and presented with a clarity that's new to me. And there is no real weakness here either. There is great solid bass that can be really big scale and throbby when listening to some grimy rap, like Fredo, Back to Basics. And the bass in that song is incredible. And the song starts with some kind of bass and notes happening well beyond the speakers playing back. And then later in that track, that bass is kind of throbbing you in the listening chair. And it's really fun because that bass is not only throbbing you, but it's detailed and delicate and presented, filling the room with a fantastic sense of clarity into the way that music has been produced. And yeah, even grimy rap sounds fantastic and is really fun to listen to when it's presented with that type of quality. And I didn't know the Mission 770 were capable of producing a bass with that much substance to it. So that's been a fantastic discovery for me as well. And as I mentioned, the vocals are presented with character, more character than I am used to. And that part I also found addictive. Vocals are presented just a little bit more special. There is less density to them compared to some other amps that I have here, but there is also more clarity, a bit more freedom to them. You hear into the vocal a little bit more because they are less dense sounding. They sound a little bit more live, open and expressive. A little bit, but noticeable. And with the right source, the treble is crisp, airy, and really spot on for detail and presence. But this does massively depend on the signal coming into the Embrace. And this exceptional sound that I've just been describing to you, I definitely did not start with. In fact, my first impressions of the amplifier were not positive at all. my whole system, including the amplifier, was stone cold at this point, but for the first hour or so, I really didn't like the sound at all. It was hard, it was aggressive, it was just too intense and just too much for me. And it made me think that maybe this is an amplifier that will sound best with a vinyl source. So I prepped the Avid Ingenium, and this allowed me to set up a new toy I have to play with as part of my vinyl journey, the Avid Pellar Phono Stage. And I was very impressed actually. This was the best that I had heard the Ingenium sound, and by far the best I have had vinyl sounding in my room. And that encouraged me to go back to my digital setup and make some settings changes for the Singsa SU6. And I also messed around with the chord QTIS voltage, discovering that 3 volt sounded noticeably the best. To my surprise actually, the higher voltage seemed to give the most solid sound. And by this time, I was really starting to become happier with the sound of the system, but I also realized that the Embrace amplifier had been on for several hours, and I think I noticed that its sound had started to change as well. And this is likely why there are 3 settings for its power, off and on, which makes sense, but there is also a standby option which turns off the amplifier but keeps the preamplifier on, so the tubes stay glowing and stay warm. And I think this is intentional to try and reduce the couple of hours it takes for the Embrace to sound its best. I think it's a great idea and I used it all the time. And listening to the system with the QTIS DAC, I was getting most of the excellent sound that I described at the start of the video, except there was a little bit of high frequency edginess to the sound, even with the filter mode set to a warmer sounding option. Deeper bass notes weren't quite as clean as I've had before from the Mission 770, and there was some hollowness to the sound, which I think was being caused by some upper bass, maybe lower mid-range leanness, which was fine, but I thought maybe we could do better. But I wasn't sure whether it was the amplifier's sound, so I thought it made sense to replace the QTIS DAC with the Chord Hugo TT2, because I know it's an exceptional DAC in these most critical areas. And with the TT2 in the system, the amplifier delivered in all of these areas much better than I was expecting. And I also noticed a significant drop in the system's perceived noise floor, aka a darker background where the music sounds tighter and stronger and there was more tonal saturation. So I was impressed that the Embrace was able to scale up and deliver a much better sound with the much better and more expensive DAC. But I was also impressed that it was transparent enough for me to be able to hear some of the really key and clear differences between the 2 chord DACs. And to test things further, I thought it made sense to do some amplifier comparative listening. And I have listened to 4 integrated amplifiers since I've had the Mission 770s. I like the Kinki Studio EXM1 Plus for its clean sound and deep go away from you soundstage. I like the Audioflight FLS9 for a similar reason, but preferred it for its more solid and more authoritative sound. The Lima Tucana 2 Anniversary I like for its more lively upfront and more energetic immediate presentation. What's interesting is, for starters, 2 of these amplifiers cost significantly more, and yet with the Embrace it feels like you don't really have to choose your poison, you can have it all. You really can almost have the best of all of the amplifiers without any of the drawbacks. And the soundstage is really interesting because it almost feels like it is both. So the soundstage, yes, it goes really quite far away from you behind the speakers, but at the same time that soundstage feels like it's coming out to you, the listener, as well. So like the soundstage starts from you, the listener, and goes away from you, rather than starting at the speakers and goes away from you. And it is really impressive in that regard. It's not like that for all music, but it is like that for a lot of the music I was listening to. And it's just a perception, a sense thing. And it's not something that I think I'm used to, but I did really enjoy it. And again, I found that very addictive. And the immediacy of sound seems crisper and quicker than I recall from the more expensive amplifiers, and definitely crisper and quicker and livelier than from the Kinki Studio, which I did a listening comparison, but also with impactful dynamics, easily as good as the best of the bunch here, maybe even better. So like I've said before, the Embrace really comes over as this powerhouse type of amplifier, which is really, really interesting because it's not when you look at the specs and when you look at it on paper, so it can only be down to a very clever design. power supply chassis is a good size and quite heavy, but nothing crazy here. And the main chassis is small and surprisingly light, and is the opposite to what you expect from a modern amplifier. Light and hollow, not solid and dense. And the top plate allows you to see inside, which I really like, by the way. It shows confidence in the design and build quality. And on one side, it appears to be an extremely simple preamplifier with some nice polypropylene clarity caps and Togram ECC 82 NOS tubes that I think are from the 1960s and not expensive to replace. On the other side is what appears to be a very simple and really quite small amplifier board that is Class AB in design and produces 100 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 175 watts into 4 ohms. So that is a good amount of power, but nothing to really scream home about, and nothing like how it sounds actually in the flesh. Like I said, it sounds like a really large amplifier that you're listening to. So this all must be down to a clever design. I assume maybe the use of the tubes in the design as well, and I'm also assuming other good quality component parts. Am I saying the Embrace is perfect? Of course not, but it's not easy to find fault here. Its overall build quality is very good. I like the volume control and the input channel selector feel. They have an old-fashioned heavyweight solidity to them in use. The remote control, it makes no sense because you can only adjust the volume and there are lots of unused buttons, and sometimes it's hard to get the volume exactly where you want it depending on the music, so that could be better. I love VU meters, and these have a great action or motion to them, but sat back at a distance of about 12 feet away, I couldn't see them, which is a real shame, so I'll just turn the light off to try and forget about them. The very long warm-up time could be seen as a negative for some audiophiles, of course, and the fact that the volume control is called hug intensity, well, that is one of those quirky things you just have to get used to. But I actually think it's more of an indicator of how much you're going to hug the wife when she lets you buy one. And the Embrace's very quirky design I find charming. I think the price is charming too, £3,590. So yes, it's not a cheap amplifier, but it's definitely not an expensive amplifier for the sound quality that it can deliver. So to sum things up, this has been a very long review, but I felt that the Audiozen Embrace really deserved a full explanation because it is one of those products that don't really sound or perform anything like how it looks. So I felt it deserved, like I said, a full explanation. And just for clarification purposes, I don't know anybody at Audiozen. Nobody has asked me or paid me to say anything like this in this review. I just genuinely feel that credit is earned where credit is due. So if you're in the market for a new amplifier, especially if you're looking for one to power your new missions, don't overlook the Audiozen Embrace. Seek it out for a demo if you can. Make sure it's been on for a few hours before you listen critically, but make sure you seek it out for a demo just to make sure that this kind of presentation works for you with your speakers in your room and your personal tastes, of course. But I genuinely think it's a next level awesome amplifier that's actually a real hi-fi bargain even at its price point. And I actually wonder if I can take its performance even further with some of the things I'm about to do to the HiFi system. So to me, that's really exciting. And if you'd like to, see all of that, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. This has been a long review. If you're still here at the end, I can't thank you enough. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.